Joining me on the pavilion today is Dan Weston. Dan, please indulge me by introducing yourself.
Thanks for having me on. It's great to chat. So I'm a cricket analyst and specialist in recruitment and strategy rather than video analytics. So I primarily work with teams with regards to helping them with their recruitment, data-driven strategies for recruitment, data-driven strategies for long-term development of processes and opposition analysis, things like that. So I work with Leicestershire in the county cricket circuit in England, and also with Birmingham Phoenix for the 100, which starts in, I think, less than 2 weeks now. So I'm super excited about the start of the 100.
Well, it must be quite good because I think you did do recruitment for the 100 the last time and it didn't happen, and you sort of had to do things again.
Yeah, that's quite right. So actually, it's funny because we've actually, including the first draft, which was October 2019, the replacement draft, which was February 2021, and then the wildcard draft, which was last Friday. Well, I've actually done 3 drafts and we haven't played a single match yet. So yeah, finally looking forward to kind of, all the work that we've put in over the last couple of years, kind of hopefully coming to some fruition on the pitch over the next month or so.
You've spoken about your work as looking at the data to help you with recruitment. What are some of the things that you look at when you are trying to evaluate a player, the data points?
I think that there's a lot of things that I will go into. I look at maybe 20 different metrics or something for an individual player. But I can't obviously go into massive detail about what I'm specifically looking for. But generally, from I don't think it's a secret that I've written about boundary hitting a lot and boundary prevention. So in an ideal world, you would want, if you're looking at, say, T20 recruitment I'm talking about here, you want to find above average boundary hitters with the bat and above average boundary preventers with the ball, if that makes sense. So that way, if you can recruit players like that, it gives you an excellent chance of hitting more boundaries than your opposition, and that drives success in T20 cricket. Around 85% of teams win the match when they hit a higher boundary percentage than their opposition, and of the 15% that don't, a lot of the time it's either extremely close match where maybe the match goes down to the last 1 or 2 balls, or in often cases of those 15%, it's the team who maybe they lost the boundary percentage and won the match, but it was very narrow, very small difference, and then they hit more sixes. So they hit maybe 1 or 2 boundaries fewer, but the ones that they hit were often worth 2 runs more, if that makes sense. So if you looked, say, if you run a filter through like historical T20 matches over the last 5 years or so in franchise leagues, internationals, whatever, I think that you would find that if you filtered for teams who won the boundary percentage count for one match and also they won a 6 percentage count for the same match as well, about 95% plus of the time they will win the match. So it's very important to find players who can fit those skill sets, players who can hit really well with boundaries. I'm talking maybe like 20% plus boundaries. Generally speaking, say like Blast, IPL, it's 16.5, 17% is average. So you want to try and find players who can hit 20% plus. And then the preventers with the ball as well. But what you also have to be cognizant of there is that spinners tend to concede less boundaries than pace bowlers, but that's usually a byproduct of the phases that they operate in. So, spinners will often operate middle overs, and there they will tend to be rotated against a lot more than people looking to hit boundaries. So what tends to happen is there's this general dynamic where a spinner will have a higher dot ball percentage. Sorry, I'll start again. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. So the spinners tend to not bowl as many dots as pacers, but they don't concede as many boundaries either. So paces will have more dots, but they also concede more boundaries generally. Particularly, I'm talking about the paces who operate, like the what people call them top and tail, or I call them 2-2s, so 2 power play, 2 death bowlers. They're the ones who they tend to have a higher dot ball, but also a higher boundary percentage. But if you're operating at the death, say you're a regular 2-over death bowler, you really don't want to be conceding more than 20% boundaries, even still. Anything over that is quite poor. But you see a lot of teams make mistakes with their recruitment in that way. So you routinely see like an IPL team pay big money for someone who concedes like 23% boundaries or something like that, 23, 24, and that's not good recruitment at all generally. So that's something that I look at a lot in depth, and I also look at maybe role flexibility. I think is pretty important as well. So for example, pace bowlers. It's quite nice to be able to have that role flexibility where they can operate in perhaps all 3 phases, whereas some players are maybe they're much more suited to bowling like 1 or 2 phases, and particularly if it's like, say you've got like a power play specialist, for example, it's very difficult to then find an opportunity to get 4 high value overs out of that particular bowler because the maximum they can bowl in a power play is 3. So sometimes you might have a benefit in the power play, but then you might have to find 1 or 2 overs from that bowler elsewhere, which tends to have negative expectation, or you have to find the overs from another bowler, which perhaps can impact on your batting strength. So there's a lot of knock-on effects with that type of thing as well. With batting, what you don't want to find is a player who's really good at facing one type of a bowler, but poor at another. So I'll give you a broad example, and we'll talk about South African cricket a little bit in here, I think, is that what I find with the South African team generally is that if you look at their numbers, they're a lot stronger facing pace than spin. And that enables, in terms of strike rates I'm talking about, so that enables, in theory, would enable opposition teams to match up with spinners against them. So if I'm playing South Africa and I get the choice of conditions, I'm producing a turning wicket and I'm picking like 3 or 4 spinners, maybe ideally 2 from the batting group, 2 from the bowling group, or something like that, and I'm overloading them with spin. And I think that's a good way of tying the South African batting group down. Now, I noticed that in the recent series against the West Indies, they didn't actually really do that. So that was interesting. So I think West Indies made quite a major tactical error in that particular series, and I think that was a big factor as to why South Africa performed pretty well in that series overall. But that's how I would approach that particular problem, if that makes sense, to give kind of a real life contextual example.
Yes, it does. And you have mentioned that spinners will concede fewer boundaries, but they have a poor dot ball overall.
Yeah.
Poor dot ball percentage when bowling. And however, because of the phase that they bowl in, they tend to also benefit from the fielding. Now, what about pacers in the middle overs? Does that really work, or have you seen it to be something of a problem?
I think it really depends on who the player is. So, for example, like you've got different types of paces as well. So, if we go from like one extreme to the other, I think that someone like Benny Howell, who bowls pretty slow pace, I think he's kind of described himself as fast spin in the past. He's got a lot of variations, and he's had a lot of success bowling through the middle with that skill set. But then you've also got the other extreme, when you've got maybe someone like Lockie Ferguson, who's a very quick bowler, very sharp, and bowls a lot in the middle overs, or more than the average pacer in the middle overs, I should say, and kind of plays that enforcer role pretty well as well. So there's 2 examples of where pace off and pace on can work quite well, but I think it's very much down to the individual player and their skill set. Personally speaking, I would lean towards more spin than pace in the middle, but it depends a lot. You have to take a lot of factors into account: venue, opposition, etc. So there's a lot to consider, really. I don't think it's a kind of a question you can easily answer as kind of give blanket guide, if that makes sense. Just
Yeah.
it's kind of horses for courses kind of thing, really.
Mm. And I wanted to ask that, there is such a small difference between 100 and T20
Mhm.
as opposed to T20 and ODIs. So ideally, an individual like yourself, an analyst, would try to employ probably strategies that are more alike when creating a team for the 100 that you would with any other format.
Yeah, so obviously we can't say with any certainty how the 100's going to play out in terms of how teams are going to approach the different resources that they have in terms of the 20 fewer balls. So I have ideas how I think it will play out, but there's a lot of assumptions in that as well. One of which would be that the primary assumption would be that teams will operate with high degree of efficiency, which I think we've seen over T20 leagues isn't necessarily a given. So it's difficult to really say with any certainty. We are slightly fortunate because we have T10 as well, not obviously in the UK, but in the UAE, and we can look at how maybe teams looked at solving the problems in T10 with 60 fewer balls as resources, but still 10 wickets in hand, as opposed to 20 fewer balls as well. So if you look at it as like a kind of like a line, if that makes sense, you'd have like a T20 here, the 100 here, and then a bit further across you'd have the T10. So you can kind of like look at it a bit like that. I've done some maths with regards to like pass scores, what I expect strike rates, how I expect strike rates to change and stuff like that. But we don't know for sure. We've got really kind of no real concrete idea. I think that I'd be surprised if I was far off, but we don't know. There's also other rules and different rules that will change as well in the 100. So we're talking about bowlers bowling multiple overs at the same time, for example. So will that have a positive or negative effect on run scoring? We don't really know yet. You might turn around and say, okay, well, maybe a bowler will be able to, because they're bowling 10 balls rather than 6, will they have a better rhythm? But then we might turn around and say, okay, well, the batter's got a better chance of lining them up then because they're facing more balls against a consistent opponent. So again, it's difficult to say. We don't know, and I think that's one of the fascinating things about the tournament coming up is that we really don't know how it's going to develop, and I think that's a super exciting thing that I'm really excited to be part of.
So it's sort of like blindfolded, and you're waiting for it.
Well, maybe not blindfolded, but maybe we have like a little cut for this, a bit of my eye or something like that.
Let's try to understand how you got into this. How did you get into analytics to begin with?
That's a good question, and it's a long story. Which if I told the full story, I think we'd have to start a new podcast. But I'll give you the brief version. I've always been really interested in sport and maths, so it kind of combines really nicely from that. Also did an accounting degree at university, so kind of always had that kind of maths orientated background. Then I started more of a professional gambling career. So, but that's again, it's all maths. It's stuff like online poker and stuff where everything at the end of the day it's just rational decision making and maths, taking the emotion out of the situation, having good discipline, understanding that you can make good decisions and lose, and bad decisions and win, but over the long run, the variance will level itself out, and as long as you make more good decisions than bad, you'll win more than you lose. And actually, if you think about those things that I just discussed, there's an awful lot of parallels with the skill sets from that and T20, or just cricket in general, I should really probably say. So, for example, in T20, you probably see matches yourself where teams make really bad decisions, but they still win. Maybe because like one guy plays a superstar innings or something like that. And you also see teams make a lot of good decisions and they lose. They pick the right matchups, but opposition like edged a 4 off the last ball to win or something like that, or stuff like the World Cup final where England managed to run those extra runs, and then it was a super over and stuff like that. Stuff like that happens in the short run. In short term, you can make a lot of good decisions and still lose. And I think that's a really good message where to supporters and just general kind of aficionados of cricket, if you like, is that actually just because a team wins doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually doing a good job. They might have won that individual match, but are they doing a good job over the long term? And I'm talking about maybe long term. Medium term, we would say like maybe 1 to 2 seasons. Long term, a bit longer than that. But you can, like I say, you can win matches when you don't play well, making bad decisions. But over the long run, you're going to lose more than that you win doing that. And it's important to have that mindset, So, for example, like at Leicestershire this year, we've had a pretty disappointing T20 campaign. However, to some extent, the underlying metrics suggest that we're actually a better team than our results would suggest. But still, there's a lot of areas for improvement that we're very aware of. But the point I'm trying to make is that sometimes you can't get too downhearted by 1 or 2 defeats as long as the processes are good. And I'm talking about long-term processes as well. So like, yeah, it's easy for coaches and fans to focus on the game ahead or the game that's currently being played. But I prefer to look at, say, from a 4-day context, I'm not so much worried about the next 4 days. I'm more worried about the next 4 years. And that's a really, really important long-term objective, And sometimes the problem is that I think coaches have more of a short-term mentality, primarily because they're often on short-term contracts, or they know that if their short-term results aren't good, then they're going to get sacked. Whereas I'm much more sort of in favour of that long-term process. That as long as you follow the good process in the long run, you will get good results, and that's the most important thing. So it's all over. It's over for short-term, at least. It's process over results.
All right. So from the accounting degree to the professional gambling career, what was your speciality?
In terms of, so I played a lot of online poker, also like a lot of slots as well. I also just did a lot of work with tennis analytics as well. So there's the thing is from there, like I've always been a massive cricket fan, and I've never been good enough to play at a high level. Funny enough, I only play once a year now, and we've actually got a match in 3 days' time. So it's like the charity match that I play once a year. And so yeah, I'm really looking forward to playing on that, but I think my body's going to regret it for the week after. And I played like village cricket a bit, but to be honest with you, like now I've just got too many injuries and stuff like that, so it's very difficult to really make a commitment to do that these days. No, I'm 42 now, so I'm too old for this stuff. So I realised I was never good enough, but also like no, I loved it, and I watched a lot of it on TV, and I had that kind of numbers background a lot, and I thought, right, okay, so I'll start building a bit of a database and trying to learn a bit more about the players and stuff, particularly in T20, which is just becoming more and more prevalent on the TV. And then kind of pushed me down this rabbit hole that I really couldn't climb out of, in terms of, right, I want to learn this, I want to learn that, I want to learn everything possible. And then within a few weeks or something, I managed to get this like massive database of players, and realised that pretty much most of the time the teams were making bad decisions and the commentators didn't really know what they were talking about. And so, yeah, from there it's kind of got me to that process. But then from there to where I'm at now, it's been a really long journey as well, because like it got to the point where I felt like I had a good enough understanding of the sport, and particularly the T20 format, to be able to help teams. But the teams didn't agree. So no, because the thing is, right, I'm nobody. Like I'm just some random guy who sits in his home office and has learned how to do this stuff and started writing about it and stuff like that. And no one knew who I was. But I know quite a few players pretty well, and like one county captain for one of the UK teams, on the UK counties, he said to me, if you're an ex-player who had like 50 caps for your country, he said every team in the country will want to hire you, but because you're nobody, it's so much more difficult. So you can. I mean, I can remember sending 50, 100 emails, LinkedIn messages, whatever, to whoever you could possibly find details for in cricket, trying to get work. And I didn't do that over one day. I did that over a lot of days. So that tells you a little bit about the volume of people that I tried to contact in that process. And 95% plus of the time, you wouldn't even get the courtesy of a reply. And the 5%-ish of the time that you would get a reply, it was like, thanks, but no thanks. So that's extremely frustrating and to be honest with you, an often depressing process, because particularly when you feel like the skill set that you've developed would actually really help a team, and not just in terms of like the winning matches, but also like long-term processes and strategy and stuff as well. And so that was a tough time to go through, but I don't really like quitting on stuff. So, but I will say that that's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do, and certainly the hardest industry that I've ever tried to break into by a long distance would be cricket teams. Luckily, kind of a few people kind of saw the value of what I might be able to offer, and gave me some opportunities eventually. But it's quite strange, really, because like obviously now I have contracts with teams and stuff like that, but at some point in the past, I probably would have worked for teams for free. But now, obviously, I wouldn't do that. But the point is that I was just so desperate to get an opportunity, so desperate to get a foot in the door, that I would have done literally anything to do that. And even now, I mean, like some random general manager of Big Bash team followed me on Twitter a couple of weeks ago. I won't say who it was, and I just messaged him and said, would be good to maybe have a chat for half an hour to see if there's any value that I can give you as an organisation to help with your recruitment and long-term strategy. You don't get a reply. And even this is now, even when you have work and you have like goodness knows how many blue tick players and coaches and stuff following you on Twitter as well, they can see that you're not some random nobody. They still don't reply to you. So it does really show you the barriers that are up in terms of trying to break into the industry. And I do get a lot of people on LinkedIn or emails and stuff like that saying, I'm an aspiring analyst. I'd love to work with cricket teams and stuff. And it's really hard. They ask for advice, and it's really hard for me to give a positive advice to them, because it's such a difficult industry to break into. And if they've got the skills to do this, they've probably also got the skills to do really well in other industries as well. So sometimes I end up saying to them, maybe your skill sets would really benefit this industry, but I think maybe you'll be better off financially focusing on a different industry, because it's just the barriers to entry are so difficult. So yeah, it's a frustrating process.
And what do you think might be, the hurdles that make the entry into cricket so huge? Is it because there are people who feel like this is something that only they must do and outsiders must just stay out there?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair comment, actually. So I use the word wisdom in inverted commas here, but it's the conventional wisdom. And the tradition that, you only know what you're talking about if you've played the game professionally for goodness knows how many years. You have to have 50 caps in for your country before anyone takes notice of your opinion, and stuff like that. And it's just rubbish. Like I can tell you right now that like I've spent more time analysing T20 than probably I would imagine any coach has done in their entire life, but because I've made that my priority. But that doesn't. But that they would still say that, you know, even a random coach who hasn't even coached that much T20 would still probably say that they knew a lot more about it than I do, even though I've got every piece of data you could possibly wish to find that challenged everything that they had to say. That's a difficulty, that a lot of it is kind of jobs for the boys and cricket people and stuff like that, rather than people thinking outside the box and thinking, well, okay, well, maybe this guy who hasn't played, but he's got he's written a lot of stuff, and I'm not just talking about myself here. I'm talking about there's plenty of other people who do similar stuff too. Maybe they actually might be able to come across with a different point of view that can challenge us and provide an alternative rationale that will be of long-term benefit to the club. And we one of the kind of a bit of a buzz phrase at the moment in terms of industry is like, is it called that neurodiversity? I think it is. So like, they want to have a lot of people in an organisation with different mental strengths and stuff like that, different skills, and so that they can all complement each other. And at the moment, I don't think cricket has that, because they have too many people who are just ex-pros, and not enough people who don't come from that background to challenge their, let's say, inverted commas, wisdom. And that's a huge problem, because also if you look at like the T20 coaches right now, so you look at like coaches in the IPL or the Big Bash or most leagues, really, to be honest with you, you could say the same about international cricket too. How much T20 did they actually play? Not very much. How much T20 did they play from 2017-ish onwards? Probably nothing. And the reason why I use that timescale is because in 2017, roughly, we saw this, and it continues now, this dramatic change in batting intent in T20 cricket, where batters started to really look to be a lot more aggressive in terms of hitting boundaries and value their wickets a little bit less. And T20 now, say 2021, about 4 years of that extra intent, is a completely different sport to like 2008, 2009, 2010, when the IPL was in its kind of formative years. And the game that they either played or started coaching at the start is now completely different. And I don't think that a lot of time they've grown with that. And it's very difficult for them to grow that when they're in this bubble the whole time of coaching one league, then the next league and whatever. When they don't, because they don't have the alternative views from the outside. So you see it. There's a few coaches that I'm pretty sure conform to this dynamic, where they've been coaching T20 for a long time, and they still like prioritize dot ball avoidance rather than boundary hitting. But I think it's because they haven't had a chance to evolve as a coach, because they've been doing it for so long that they haven't had a break to reassess whether their methods are still good methods.
One other thing that I was thinking about is you were talking about people not, actually getting a better perspective of where T20 is the fact that, cricket is a sport that is numbers based, However, there is such a short focus on the numbers themselves. For instance, we don't have proper fielding metrics.
Yes.
You don't get teams that train people how to throw properly, because that throw is going to be a game changer at some point. Depending on where you are putting yourself, your fielders, you cannot just put the fast bowler on the boundary because they run fast and they have a strong arm. You need to teach them.
Well, it's the done thing, isn't it? People don't challenge the done thing, and that's the whole thing, isn't it? Really,
Yeah.
That conventional challenged.
And so, do you think soon in the future we are going to have a situation where this mindset might change?
Yeah, but it depends on your definition of soon. So, do I think it will happen in the next, say 3 to 5 years? Probably not. Do I think it will happen in the next 10 or 20 years? Well, that's more likely. And you talk about fielding, and I think that's a really interesting case study in isolation as well, because I think if you look at fielding, there's some people have tried to create, impact ratings for fielders and stuff like that. In a T20 match, the overwhelming majority of players conform to a plus or minus 1 run per innings negative or positive impact. So we can, from that, assert that the impact of an individual fielder is mostly very negligible. So it would be more of like a line call between two players. Like if two players have got similar expected batting output, for example, then you just pick the better fielder. But you wouldn't make fielding a kind of a barometer for selection, if that makes sense, or like you wouldn't value fielding over their primary skill set, put it that way. But where I think fielding analytics could be a lot more useful is looking at the individual bowlers and batters and stuff like that, and then working out where the best fielding positions are from like a runs per ball perspective or something like that for each outcome. So, for example, ultra pace, 90-mile-an-hour pace bowlers, should they have certain fielding positions because the balls tend to go more down certain areas because of their bowling style, stuff like that. Then but that, at the moment it's kind of like that conventional wisdom stuff again, where this is a kind of a standard field for a bowler, and we might adjust it a bit depending on who the batter is, but no one really knows whether that's a run saving or a run conceding on average per ball field. No one has the data for that. I think that's something that if you're saying to me, right, okay, you can choose between knowing that or the value of each individual player in terms of the fielding, plus or minus, as a fielder, as an individual fielder, I would choose the fielding layout much, as a priority.
Yeah, as you are saying that, when you do your fielding mapping properly and you have the right numbers, instead of saying, this bowler, for bowler A, we are going to have one slip, because that's what we normally do for bowlers like him or her.
Yeah.
Let's have a short third man, simply because a similar bowler will have that positioning, or, or because maybe, those sort of metrics, when you look at cricket, they are missing, they are not there, and yet it's a very numbers-based sport.
Yeah. It's funny how that works, isn't it, really? Because it's, as you say, it's a very numbers-based sport, but then there's that kind of resistance a little bit as well, and maybe that's a part coaching resistance, part technological resistance, and part media resistance, I think. But the media, I think, is very difficult to you can never please all the people all the time. So probably like someone like myself, who is very numbers driven and obviously analytics driven in terms of T20 and stuff like that as well. I want as much information as I possibly could have for the matches that I watch on the TV. I want if you could overlay half a screen with data, I'd probably be delighted. But casual supporter who's maybe just like channel surfing and having a couple of beers at night or whatever, and I'll stick the cricket on or whatever, they're not going to want that. So you can never please all the people all the time. So that's extremely difficult. I do think though that maybe the broadcasters don't display the right metrics sometimes though, because like stuff like career average and career strike rate is just nonsense, because it doesn't give you any insight into whether the player's improved or declined, and also it doesn't take into account, for example, what I was saying earlier about the dramatic increase in batting intent as well over the last few years as well. So career data is just nonsense. If someone said to me, here's his career data for a player and stuff on a piece of paper, I just read a piece of paper up because it's worthless. It's not worth the paper it's written up. But so you might be more beneficial, for example, for the media to put on the TV with like a 3-year average or something like that would be much more relevant, but perhaps a little less catchy as well.
T20 is split into three distinct phases. I think you touched on that earlier. We have the power play, we have the middle overs,
Yeah.
and we have the death overs. And
Mhm.
one thing that I've noticed is there is generally, with most teams, very poor middle overs intent, and they try to compensate at the death.
Mhm.
Mm. And ideally, if we are looking at statistical models, what would be the average boundary rate that a team must probably strive for within the middle overs?
That's a really good question. Wow, I don't have that. I have that on my computer, but I don't have it straight to hand right now. But I agree with your general assertion that the teams are too passive in the middle overs in terms of their boundary intent. And we see that a lot. I think that it's a problem a little bit with the South African national team, like I mentioned earlier, in that the poor playing of spin in terms of strike rate. But I also think it's a prevalent IPL dynamic as well. So the teams often they will be quite cautious in the middle overs, and then they will just go crazy at the death and try and chase like 15 and over at the death or something like that. They'll take the game a little bit too long for my liking, actually. I think like that. And we talk about like poor decisions that work well. I think there was in the one of the IPL in the UAE that was at late 2020. There was one game where I think a team needed like 60 plus off the last 4 overs, and they got it. So and actually, they butchered the chase real bad. There was it was a really poor chase. They poorly timed chase, but they got there. They got the win, despite I think making poor decisions. And then every other team tried to do exactly the same thing. They were like, "Oh, if they can do it, we can do it too," which is just nonsense. Because statistically, the chances of you chasing 60 off 4 overs with not that many wickets in hand is like very, very low. But and that shows you like the kind of that passiveness in the middle overs, and then that desire just to go all guns blazing at the death, which is a very, very high risk strategy. Whereas maybe a little bit more intent in the middle overs. I think if you were to maybe hit like, I don't know, 12, 13% in the middle overs boundaries, that would be pretty good at most venues. But again, it's very venue specific, very opponent specific. If your opponent's got a Rashid Khan against you, then you might have to take a little bit of a different approach. But if you're playing at Durham, for example, in England, which has got big boundaries, then you might have to take a little bit of a different approach to, say, if you're playing at Headingley, which we played at Headingley a few weeks ago, and it was just a road with small boundaries basically. So it's completely different. Like you can't say you can't have like a complete general guide, but I think that ballpark figure that I mentioned would be okay. But it's so situational.
Yeah. So basically, if this is not the exact figure, but if a team can try to get about 12% of the boundaries within the middle overs, they give themselves a fair chance, so to speak.
Yeah, but at least that. Ideally, maybe a touch more, but yeah, at least that. So because you can catch up the boundaries in the power play and at the death.
Mm-hmm.
But the key metric is about 70. You want to hit about 17% boundaries on average as a bare minimum, unless you've got an extremely good bowling attack. And talking about across all phases, not just the middle overs, all phases. Because it really depends on your bowling attack as well. So, for example, we look at England. England in T20s, in my opinion, have got a very strong batting lineup and a very mediocre bowling lineup compared to other countries I'm talking about. And so their batting, because they have to win the boundary percentage to win matches on a regular basis, their batters have to really play very aggressively because they know that their bowlers are going to leak boundaries. Whereas someone like, I don't know, Australia, perhaps, you might say that their bowlers are very good, so they can maybe choose to utilize a more conservative strategy, or pick maybe like another kind of anchor or rotator type player rather than another boundary hitter. But whereas England don't have that luxury, and that's where I think that we talk about. I don't know if you see much of this in South Africa, but in England, on social media and in the media generally, there's this constant discussion about Dawid Malan, whether he should be in the England team for T20 cricket. Now, what I think is critical here with the discussion is that it's not, the decision shouldn't necessarily be about Dawid Malan. It should also be about the rest of the team, and does he fit into the team dynamics? Now, my argument would be that if your bowling attack is weak, you can't afford someone who will have slow starts, particularly when Stokes and to some degree Morgan will also try and do a similar type of thing. That's a potential disaster, particularly in a knockout match. So I personally, I wouldn't pick Malan, but it's not because I don't think he's a good player. That's not the point. The point is that he's not the right player in my view for England, because their bowling attack doesn't give them the luxury of picking a player who plays like him. Now, if Malan, for example, played for Pakistan or Australia, who have got really good bowling lineups, then he actually probably would be an ideal player for them. So it's not necessarily about the player's numbers in terms of basic metrics like average or strike rate. I don't even look at this, but world ranking that everyone seems to focus on being. I think it's nonsense. But it's not even about that. It's about whether you fit in. It's not about picking the best 11 players. It's about picking the best starting 11. The things are two different things. The best 11 players don't always fit in together. It's a bit like a jigsaw. You've got to complement each other. You've got to have that puzzle where you've got to fit in and create a group rather than 11 individuals. And sometimes people do talk about cricket as a team sport played by individuals, and I think that's often still the case, and I don't think it should be, because it's all got to be about that kind of collaboration in terms of, like, if you've got a weak batting lineup, you've got to have a very strong bowling lineup. If you've got a weak bowling lineup, you can't afford slow starters or rotators or below average boundary hitters or anything like that. It just won't work, because you're not going to win the boundary percentage enough times to be a successful team if you do that. So it's not even about who the best players are, it's about who's the best player for your group. And that's why I would pick, maybe on ability at least, I would pick, like an Alex Hales or a Joe Clark over someone like Malan, who's, for the England team. Does that mean that I would also make the same decision if they play for Pakistan or Australia? No, it doesn't mean that I'll make the same decision. But for England, that's the best option, I think.
And ideally, speaking about this, getting the people who help teams get the impetus, ideally, what should be the individual boundary percentage be if they are to be able to help their team to strive for that good total?
So there's a huge correlation between boundary percentage and strike rate. So that's extremely important. So if you hit below 16% boundaries, it's extremely difficult to hit over a 140 strike rate as an individual batsman. And I'm not talking about an individual innings, I'm talking about over seasons and stuff like that. Very, very difficult. I think you have to, if you're below average boundary hitter, you have to be like a truly world class rotator or someone who turns ones into twos really, really frequently. So I look at the data for that, and someone like Babar Azam fits into that bracket to some degree. Maybe slightly below average boundary hitter, but extremely high non-boundary strike rate, which suggests that he's excellent rotator and excellent running between the wickets. So that was, but even then, he just doesn't strike much higher than 140 or roughly. I'm talking about when he played. I'm talking about when he played for Somerset in the Blast. This is what I'm comparing to there, because I did detailed analysis on all the players. But you can be a poor rotator, but a good boundary hitter, but you can strike a lot better than 140. So, like, you look at someone like Sunil Narayan or Chris Gale or Evan Lewis, and they all can kind of conform to that dynamic. There are plenty of other players too, but they're the ones who from my metrics really stand out. So yeah, if you're looking at kind of a ballpark guide, like I said, about 16.5 to 17 would be acceptable, about roughly about average for a top 6 batter. Anything below that is low. Anything below 15% really is like completely unacceptable. Especially if you're a team who do not have a unbelievable bowling lineup. Anything above 20% is you're starting to get into very impressive territory, and anything above sort of 23-ish is exceptional. 25 plus is world class. There's probably like maybe ballpark 10 players in the world who can hit over 25% over a decent sample size. So they're the kind of some ballpark boundary percentage guides for batters, in terms of the brackets for rating players, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And I think also one will also have to balance that with the batter's dot ball percentage. And ideally, what would be the ideal dot ball percentage for the batter?
There isn't one, because dot ball percentage is nowhere near as critical a metric as boundary percentage. And that's going to disappoint the traditionalists, but that's truly the case. So I said earlier, 85% of the boundary percentage winners win the match. That drops about 20% to the lowest dot ball winners. So it's having a low amount of dots is nice to have. Having a high boundary percentage, or high net boundary percentage, I should say, is mandatory. Because look at it like this, right? If you have, I don't know, 20, let's say 25 dots in a 120 ball T20 innings, that will be exceptional, right? In terms of like you're really turning the scoreboard over extremely regularly. But if you do that and you hit like 12-13% boundaries, you're still not going to get much more than 160. But you can hit 50 dots, and as long as you hit over 20% boundaries, you can hit over 160. Especially if you hit a lot of sixes. There's plenty of instances of that happening in the past. So my point is that dot ball avoidance cannot get you to a high score, whereas boundary percentage and a higher amount of dots actually can.
That is very interesting. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I love it, because I was trying to write this article where I was saying, you know what, ones are not very helpful for a betting team. You have just avoided a dot ball, but done nothing brilliant with it.
Yeah, 100%. So look at it like this, right? So let's say on average, let's just say a ballpark figure, about most leagues between 130 135 strike rate is about average, right? So that's between 1.3 and 1.35 runs per 100 balls. So a single is less than that. So that's usually a negative outcome for a batter, because they obviously they're scoring below the average strike rate for that league. Now, you can go into even more further micro detail and say, if the bowler matchup is a good matchup for the batter and they're hitting a single, that's an even worse outcome, because they should be hitting an even higher strike rate when the bowling matchup is good for the batter. Right? Now, I actually have a point of view where a deliberate single in T20 cricket, and I'm talking about just a knock into a gap to run one, when the matchup is good for the batter, is a terrible outcome for that individual ball. So when the matchup is good for the batter, they have to really look to pile the pressure on with boundaries. And it doesn't matter if you try and hit a boundary and the fielder does a great stop and you hit a single, that's fine because you have the intent to try and hit the boundary. But if you're just knocking it into a gap when the matchup is good for you, that's probably costing you like 0.6 or ish runs per ball that you do that. And you're not going to just do that one ball in an innings. So if you add that up over all the different instances, it's actually quite a lot, and probably more than the average winning or losing margin in T20s over history. So yeah, it's incredibly important that the batters are very aware of those situations. And I think, to be honest with you, a lot of them aren't. I think they play the individual situation. They don't think about the detail. They don't think about the matchups. They don't think, okay, well, maybe the guy at the other end is a better option for this matchup than I am, or vice versa. Let's say for the sake of argument, a right arm off spinner is bowling to a right-handed batsman. Okay, and there's another left, and they've got a left-hander at the other end. Okay, that right-hander knocking the ball into a deliberate gap for a single that's a terrible outcome for that ball, because you're getting the bad matchup on strike for the batter, and you're scoring at less than the required rate. That's a terrible decision. So really, in that situation, the batter should be going boundary or dot. The right-hander should be going boundary or dot, because he doesn't want the left-hander on strike, and a single's a bad outcome.
That's brilliant. Well, unfortunately, I have to let you go to terminate the podcast. Otherwise, I think we can talk all day. Personally,
100%.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think I would record 3-4 as we go, but just for the sake of this one, we have to cut it here, and I have to thank you for doing this with me, for sharing more of your knowledge, more of your insights on T20 cricket and the 100. I'm trying to get myself into the zone for the 100 myself, because it's cricket.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it will be a really high standard as well, because, instead of 18 counties, there's now 8 teams in 100. So there's going to be that condensing of quality in terms of local players, high quality overseas players. And I think that a lot of people are going to be pleasantly surprised by the quality of the cricket that will happen over the next month or so in the 100.
Nah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm liking the names I see on those teams. I'm psyching myself up.
Absolutely.
Okay. Have a great day, Dan.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really, really great to chat as always.
Thank you.